Okay, everyone, welcome back. We'd like to begin our third and final panel, our conference. The panel is titled Ethics and Democracy, Past, Present, and Future. Our first speaker on this panel is Dr. Tamar Novick. Let me introduce her. Tamar Novick is a research scholar at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science in Berlin, and the leader of the Body of Animals Working Group at the Max Planck Institute. Her areas of specialization are history of technology and the body, environmental history, and animals in the modern Middle East. She received her PhD degree from the History and Sociology of Science Department at the University of Pennsylvania in 2014 and was a postdoctoral fellowship here at the Edmond Safra Center for Ethics in 2014 and 15. Her book manuscript entitled Milk and Honey, Technologies of Plenty in the Making of the Holy Land examines how settlers in Palestine, who attributed special qualities to their land, used science and technology to reconstruct a plentiful mystical past, literally, quote, a land flowing with milk and honey. Her current research focuses on the use of bodily waste in biomedical research and on the role of urine in infertility treatments. And she will be talking to us about taking the piss, distant stakeholders, and the nature of fertility science, 1934 to 1978. Tamar, good to have you.
What? Oh, yeah. So I'm so very happy to be here, and I'm very thankful for this opportunity. And one of the things that I feel so honored to be here is because it's kind of this opportunity to see where some of my thoughts that started developing when I was here as a postdoctoral fellow developed since. So I'm going to start with a short description. Beginning in 1963, hundreds of aging women who lived in elderly homes in central Israel were asked to urinate into mobile containers and donate their urine towards the Israeli struggle against infertility. Every day, the postmenopausal urine was collected with the help of female caretakers, and then a female worker hired especially for the project removed the traces of odor. The urine was driven in big containers to a local pharmaceutical company named Icafam, where a colon cake absorbed its liquids. Then, in the form of powder, it was sent to the Italian pharmaceutical company Serono in Rome. At Serono, which was then under partial ownership of the Vatican and already experienced in receiving doses of urine from old Italian nuns, sex hormones were purified from the powder and made into highly successful fertility drugs. The first to induce ovulation, named Pelgonal, only to be sent back to Israel for clinical trials in the governmental hospital of Tel Aviv. My talk today aims at characterizing global fertility science in the 20th century. I feel that I'm qualified to talk about fertility as I've mastered the issue myself recently. And I'm also going to talk about the ways in which questions about fertility played out differently in the context of Palestine and Israel. I will point to the cross-species nature of fertility science, that is the study of reproduction in relation to both humans and animals. I want to say that I'm interested in portraying this kind of long history of reproduction because it's very fragmented. It's usually described in the early years of endocrinal research that I'll describe, and then there's a big kind of gap, and then you go again to artificial reproduction technologies from, let's say, the 80s, and in between some work on the contraceptive pill, but nothing as it's very fragmented, and it's absolutely not about anything that is not human, which I think it is. Okay, so in the local context, I argue two opposing global trends in the ways science is done converged, or more accurately, continued to align for the sake of fulfilling specific political and environmental purposes vis-a-vis the support of international stakeholders. Like many other revolutions, this was made possible by the flow of bodily waste. In the case of fertility science, it happened with urine. So stay tuned for another example of a revolution that was made possible by bodily waste. I will describe the growth of global sex endocrinology research in the early 20th century and explain major transformation in the science in the post-World War II era. At its center was the move from human fertility promotion to fertility control, together with the eruption of the Green Revolution and the efforts to enhance food production and animal reproduction as part of the regime of global development plans. Taken together, these processes ultimately meant a separation in the understanding of fertility of humans and of animals. In the midst of this, in the local context, and in order to map the roots of the current fertility craze in Israel, that which won so much scholarly attention, we heard some of this in the previous panel, mainly by sociologists, anthropologists, and some economists. I have identified 3 historical centers of fertility research and 3 individuals that were fundamental to the operation of these centers of knowledge production. So, okay. Forgive me, these are some of the works that deal with the early stages of fertility science. I'll get into that in a minute. So the first three centers of that I'm reviewing, first 3 individuals. First being Bernard Sondak, who established a hormone research lab that then became part of the Hebrew University. This operated between the mid-30s and mid-60s. The second, Moses Lesniak from the Weizmann Institute, who established the Institute for Biodynamics, dedicated to the study of fertility in humans and animals. That happened from the early 50s to the late 60s. And the third, the Institute of Endocrinology at the Governmental Hospital of Tel Aviv, today the Sheba Medical Center. This all opened in 1960 and review its work until the late 70s. All 3 researchers similarly focus on fertility studies, and their work is fundamental to the ways in which fertility science is practiced in Israel. All 3 centers were heavily reliant on global funds and, in another material sense, on the flow of urine from different creatures. So Bernard Sondak was the earliest among these, considered the father of fertility research in Israel. He immigrated to Jerusalem in 1934 after a successful career in the field of reproductive physiology, later called sex endocrinology, in Germany. His research in Europe was part of the golden age of the reproductive sciences, as historians defined it, peaking in the 20s and 30s. In this period, scientists described the endocrinal system, discovered discovered various biological sources from which to purify hormones and attempted to map the reproductive system of various creatures. Not only for humans, but experts attempted to understand reproduction in livestock as well, together with the growing industrialization of agriculture, most evident in the US and Western Europe, and the growing demand for more animal-based foods. So more milk or meat basically required more knowledge of breeding. The growing field of sex endocrinology was directed at the production of fertility drugs and went hand in hand with the establishment of tight connections with pharmaceutical companies who were booming as a result of the growing understanding of hormones and the promise they held for solving infertility and other hormone-related problems in human and animals. This was a period where the infrastructure for the science industry complex was laid out. And here again, these are some of the studies that talk about these scientist pharmaceutical company relations in specific national contexts. Bernard Sondak is known for identifying the pituitary gland as a center for hormonal activity and the 2 hormones that produced in it, the gonadotropic hormones, calling them gonad A and B, and later they were called by the scientific community FSH and LH. He was also responsible for promoting urine as a substance switch of sex hormones, particularly after he found traces of female sex hormones, as they were then defined, in the urine of pregnant women, urine of pregnant mares, and even more so in stallions. At the core of his findings was a growing understanding that hormones can be found in purifying from biological matter, and also that hormones extracted from one creature can affect the hormonal balance in another. The reliance on bodily matter posed a great logistical and financial challenge. Sondek's discovery of sex hormones in urine of humans and equines was revolutionary, since urine was abundant, and because its availability nearly eliminated the need to search for hormones in slaughterhouses, where a site where animal ovaries, testes, or pituitary glands were obtained, gynecological wards for human ovaries, bloods, or placenta, or the morgue for human pituitary glands. He's particularly remembered as the developer of the first widely used pregnancy test, known as the Asch-Sondek test, which also relied on the flow of urine, in this case within the body of laboratory animal tools. I don't have the time to go into this, talking about this test. I actually did in one of the past Safra workshops, but this is an illustration of how you can know through, while injecting a urine to a mouse, if a woman or a horse is pregnant. In 1933, Sondek, like many other Jewish professionals in Germany, was forced to leave his positions with the rise of Nazi rule because he was Jewish. He moved to Jerusalem to head the gynecology ward at the Hadassah Rothschild Hospital and the parallel department at the Hebrew University Medical School that was to open that year. And in the local context, here in Palestine, Israel, my previous work dealt with Christian and Jewish settlement project in the late 19th and 20th century. And there I ultimately show that the settlement project was a biotic one, and that as part of the new environmental regime, European creatures, whether humans or animals, replaced local ones. As part of the European settlement efforts, not only human settlers but livestock and cows mainly, and their milk production became very central to the success of the settlement, and the connection with cows will become clear soon. Dairy cows became the center of the settler agriculture economy. The focus of improving milk yield and increasing the dairy cow population was consistent from very early on in the European settlement, much earlier than that, for example, in comparison to the Dutch dairy culture, which was the model for dairy farming in Palestine. Along with the attempt to prove abundance, settlers' ways of valuing animals differed from European ways, with an overall focus on quantity over quality. Quantity in milk and offsprings, that is. Cows were mainly judged by their yield and not their external features. In spite of the growing success of the new crossbreeds of local cows and European bulls, anxieties emerged in the late 20s as various farms reported on infertility problems among third and fourth generations of the crossbreeds. And this is one of the earliest publications indicating the problem of infertility, or sterility as it was called, in cows. Settlers' dairy cows suffered from infertility and high percentage of miscarriages, a phenomenon that settler farmers considered to be a sign of degeneration. Cow breeders noted that the Middle Eastern environment, together with heat and the efforts to produce lots of milk, had a negative effect on the fertility of those high-quality crossbreeds. Since annual pregnancies were and are crucial in order for cows to continue producing milk, the issue received much attention by both Jewish settlers and British authorities, and that of scientific circles, since it threatened to limit milk production capacity, but also the survival and the growth of the settlement population as a whole. The problem of infertility, moreover, was not limited to animals. During the same period, the medical community, and mainly the demographer and statistician Robert Becky, employed by the Zionist organization to decipher Palestine demographically, as we know from Anat Leiber's work, lamented that, and I quote, the disgraceful situation of the reproduction rates of the Jewish population in Palestine. As part of the attempts to deal with infertility, the Jewish Veterinary Services consulted with Sondek's lab. Sondek, with his assistant that we saw in the first slide, introduced the possibility of using hormones in cattle and other farm animals. They then argued that farmers, rather than purchasing imported fertility drugs, might find it easier to get a hold of local biological material for the purpose of treating their animals. They proposed collecting urine of pregnant women or mares and then injecting it for their infertile cows or sheep in specific amounts and times. The two also established connections with particular farmers and then trained others to collect urine and experiment with injecting to their animals. So here's an example sent to Avraham Harari, who was a farmer, but was trained by Zondick's lab and became a sort of local expert. And he kind of established himself as hormone treatment expert in the northern area of Palestine, and was going to different farms to supply fertility treatments for sheep. He was a shepherd. Zondick's work at the lab relied on financial support from the Rockefeller Foundation already in his days in Europe, that is in Germany and briefly in Sweden and England, but also in his early days in Palestine. The Rockefeller Foundation was heavily invested in fertility research during that golden age of sex endocrinology that I described before, and the attempts to find solutions to declining fertility rates among populations in Europe and the United States, namely along the lines of the eugenic movement. And I'm really looking forward to the talk we'll have about eugenics. Funding quickly became a challenge, however, because Zondick's new work environment, that is his move to the Middle East, was too far from the inspecting eyes of the foundation. So the way it worked with Rockefeller Foundation, they really wanted to go and inspect the scientists that they funded. So they would travel, they would send representatives to the lab, either in the United States or in Europe, and see that the work was in fact to the liking. When he moved to Palestine, it was not. It was out of their reach, and they kind of decided it's not worth investing in him anymore. But more importantly, his work in Palestine drifted apart from the philanthropic logic. Philanthropy in the post-World War II era, together with the global scientific community, shifted its approach to the study of fertility. After the war, as the global political map was transforming, questions about population and reproduction were dealt with very differently. Concerning humans, the scientific community and policymakers developed a deep concern about overpopulation of the world, and in particular regarding the reproduction rates of in the global south, then called the Third World. As opposed to investing in finding solutions to infertility problems, science and policy dramatically shifted towards fertility control, the development of contraceptives and family planning programs. Funding was directly targeted at population control by the newly emerging bodies such as the World Health Organization, the American NIH, and the Ford Foundation's Population Council, so different bodies dealing with this specific issue. Together with population control, neo-Malthusian fears also motivated the establishment of development programs in the global south and the eruption of the so-called Green Revolution, with growing reliance on fertilizers in agriculture, with the efforts to increase agricultural production. Enhancing agri-production had everything to do with fertility of both plants and animals. As was the case from the early industrialization of agriculture in the West, the Green Revolution meant a growing investment in producing more food. That is, to breed more plants, and even more so to breed more and more animals in order to satisfy growing demand for dairy and meat. Different institutions than the ones I just mentioned were involved in such development plans and study of animal reproduction. So one of the main one being the United Nations FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, very active until today. This second revolution, the Green Revolution, is worth mentioning, was also made possible by the waste of somebody, in this case, the droppings of birds. So known as guano, and this is work that deals with this important form of fertilizer, a book that's basically about excrement. To sum up, both types of organizations and funding bodies, those investing in fertility planning and those investing in agricultural development, were inventions of the post-World War II era. The work reflects a growing institutional separation in the management of fertility of humans and animals. For humans, a growing effort to restrict reproduction. For animals, attempts to enhance it. In the local context here, however, now as part of the newly established State of Israel, this divergence between the study of fertility of humans and that of animal never developed. As several scholars have demonstrated, Israeli state institutions, first demographers, policymakers, and health institutions were heavily invested in pronatalism for the settling population. I say that while recognizing the fact that eugenic ideas played out in both directions, both positive and negative. So you want to encourage the reproduction of some of the population and discourage another, but altogether it was all about having more and more people. The quest for solutions to problem of infertility continued to set the tone of the scientific community here. So Zondek, for example, continued to collaborate with farmers, a work that connected the human clinic to the agricultural farm, and focused on environmental concerns specific to Palestine and then Israel. He also declared explicitly that since he moved to Jerusalem, his work focused on fertility promotion rather than fertility control, motivated partially, as he once noted, by his fascination with the local biological material he encountered as a gynecologist here. As a result of this focus on infertility research, his scientific work lost the majority of the stakeholder support. The second protagonist, Moses Lesniak, immigrated to Israel in 1950 from the US after he similarly lost his position in his scientific position. He was then heading the Institute for Arctic Research. In his case, it was due to accusations of being a communist. At the Weizmann Institute, he managed to win the support of the American NIH and the Population Council in order to establish an interdisciplinary center for the study of fertility in both humans and animals. Interdisciplinary field of research he called biodynamics. So this is an article in Hebrew announcing the opening of that center. His focus on the study of nidation and development of contraceptives was at the basis of his success in fundraising. At the Institute, with his team, he indeed invested in development of a local contraceptive pill, as we know from Moshe Tikne's dissertation. However, this aligning with the demands of global investors was not long-lasting. A major part of the work at the Institute of Biodynamics was reserved to ovum transplantation and fertility enhancement in animals, and then comparative studies in humans. This research on the development of fertility treatments, defined as gonadotropic therapy, was based on Zondek's method, that is, on the purification of urine and its injection to both animals and humans. And Lesniak indeed saw himself as continuing Zondek's work. Beyond the urine of pregnant mares and women, these experiments been also combining postmenopausal urine, or sometimes they call it menopausal urine, the urine of women who passed their menopause, as it was found to contain both types of sex hormones produced in the pituitary gland, LH and FSH, that are both needed to induce ovulation. Such studies on humans at the Institute were led by a recent PhD from Geneva, Bruno Lunenfeld, who collaborated with the gynecological ward headed by Erwin Raubau at the governmental hospital Tel Aviv. And he experimented with injecting old urine to infertile young patients. So these are some of the announcements saying how this is very successful, how it's relying on elderly houses. I'll get back to that soon. Funders became very skeptical of this path of study, and the first two centers for the study of fertility closed in the late 60s. Zondek's lab in Jerusalem closed its doors with his unexpected death in 66 and was not continued 3 years after he retired from the Hebrew University, but as he was continuing to do research on the relation between fertility and the environment. Lesniak dismantled his center in 1967 and returned to the U.S. With ending the potential of doing interdisciplinary work and interspecies one on the study of fertility. He ended up being murdered, actually, at the age of 85, allegedly by a communist, because of his communist views, by a person whose family name, Novick, is suspiciously similar to my own. This was not the only place in the world where that happened, that focus on infertility research rather than fertility control. I should qualify. We know from Christo Nordlund's work, you can see here on the bottom left, we have the example of Sweden, which in the same period also developed pronatalist policies and focused for a while on infertility research. Swedish researchers were also collaborating with Israeli ones under the capacity of the community of the Gonadotropic Research Club, club initiated by Bruno Lunenfeld, the one I mentioned already. They call it the G Club in short, and you can marvel at the design of this postcard from their meeting in Copenhagen in 1960. In a material level too, Swedish fertility science was not unrelated to the Middle East or to the recognition of the research potential of the region or regional bodies. As this document demonstrates, which is found in the archives of the Swedish pharmaceutical company named Leo, Swedish scientists contacted UNRWA representatives in Lebanon in 1966 with the idea of obtaining dosages of postmenopausal urine from Palestinian refugees in Gaza. The idea was collecting urine is an expensive business, it's a logistical headache, and it's too expensive to ask women in Europe to donate the urine, so they thought there were women somewhere in the world that would give it more cheaply and it would give them some satisfaction. This never materialized. In Sweden, the trend soon reversed, and the scientific community, as it did in most of the world, turned to focus on contraception and fertility control. This, as I already argued, was never really true here. And Swedish researchers actually that used to collaborate with scientists here became very skeptical of what was going on. And the two early centers of 2 minutes. Okay. The two centers of infertility research collapsed in the late 60s. One branch did survive. This happened at Tel Aviv, and in a manner resembling the unmaterialized Swedish plan. This work, also based on urine collection campaigns, as noted at the beginning, I noted already at the beginning, was based on earlier attempts to collect urine from nuns in Rome, was then focusing on elderly homes in Israel and on to Argentina and other places around the world, and this happens until today. So you can see Bruno Lunenfeld here happily going to Argentina to see if the urine collection campaign was working. With massive investment made by Israeli government and the Ministry of Health, he was able to open the Institute of Endocrinology at the hospital, which was professionally, materially, and spatially connected to the gynecology ward there. The institute, which focused almost exclusively on sex endocrinology, rather the entire field of endocrinology, it all had to do with hormones, and won the support of the Ford Foundation beginning in 1968 with a proposal to establish a training program for professionals in Israel in the field of reproduction with a stated focus on family planning. So it was aligning with the global regime of fertility control. The program at the Institute did train some fertility experts that are kind of celebrities today, like Shlomo Mashiach, but it also, in practice, really focused on gonadotropic therapy, and which meant finding solutions to infertility. And what family planning really meant, as really connects to the two earlier talks, meant development of genetic counseling rather than talking to people about limiting the number of children they are about to have. So I would like to make this one comment that there was discussion of where this obsession with genetic counseling came from, and I would say it didn't come from Cyprus exactly. It came from these earlier attempts, and possibly we can say it came from cows. One indication on the focus on urine-based treatments became clear through the establishment as part of his center of the Global World Health Organization International Reference Center for the fertility promotion agents, and this is one of a forum that was used by the center. So the only center in the world that the World Health Organization established to promote fertility, and this was led by Bruno. And this, if I could talk more about how this is how fertility science was done locally. The Ford Foundation continued to support the research, but became very skeptical as the global agenda and the Israeli or local one really diverged. As indicated by formal correspondence I found in the Rockefeller Foundation archives from the 1970s, they started cutting funds for fertility research at Tel Aviv. and almost finishing.
Okay.
The operation of the lab and its reliance on the flow of urine from aging women to infertile patients and to cows later on was realized thanks to another form of funding through the tightening collaboration he had, or Lunenfeld had, with the Italian and then Swiss pharmaceutical company I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. Much of the equipment in his lab was purchased by this company, and more importantly, all the purified urine in its final form arrived from Rome and was applied to patients in Israel free of charge, first by the company, who was very interested in finding the results of the trial before selling the product around the world, and from 1970 with the full coverage directly through the Prime Minister's office and then by the Israeli Ministry of Health. Support for this type of therapy ceased to fit the global agenda, but it did continue to gain local institutional support. In the mid-70s, funding for fertility research gradually moved from international stakeholders to local governmental ones. I will end in 1978, when the international funding bodies became highly skeptical of the way fertility science was done here, but also the year when reports on the first IVF babies spread widely, and this really reshuffled the cards in terms of what fertility science where it should go. Urine, for the first time in half a century, came to play a secondary role. And here I'll end.
Thank you very much. Tamar, thank you.